You have $120 million in your portfolio. The barista doesn't know. The guy behind you in line doesn't know. Nobody in this coffee shop knows, and you're not going to tell them. You ordered the regular drip, $3.20, same as every Tuesday. You're in jeans that cost $40 3 years ago. Your car's in the lot, paid off, runs fine, nothing on it worth a second look. You built this quietly. But you didn't start quietly. You started exactly like everyone else in this room, performing, signaling, paying a tax you didn't know how to name, the performance tax, and it cost you more than money before you finally stopped paying it. You weren't always the person with the $3.20 coffee and the paid-off car. There was a version of you, not that long ago actually, who needed the room to know. Not in a way you would have admitted out loud. Not consciously, but the car was newer than it needed to be. The apartment was priced slightly above what made sense for what you were making, and you knew that when you signed, and you signed anyway. The watch came the month after the promotion, almost automatically, as the raise arrived with a receipt attached that said, "Now upgrade something visible." You were 27. You were making $74,000 a year at a mid-size marketing firm in Atlanta. You felt for the first time like you were becoming someone. And becoming someone, as far as you could tell, had a look. So you built the look. The lease on the car was $580 a month. The apartment was $1,850, which was $300 more than the place 2 blocks away that was nearly identical. The watch was $420, bought on a Sunday afternoon with the particular energy of someone rewarding themselves for something they hadn't fully processed yet. None of it felt reckless. Each purchase had a reason. The car, because you drove clients occasionally. The apartment, because the neighborhood was up and coming, and you told yourself it was an investment in your environment. The watch, because you'd been working hard and you deserved it. The reasons were real. The math underneath them was not. Here's what the math actually said. The car lease, $580 a month, 36 months, was $20,880 out the door for a machine you would hand back at the end with nothing to show for it. The premium apartment was costing you an extra $3,600 a year over the comparable unit 2 blocks south. The watch depreciated the moment you buckled the strap. None of these things were building anything. They were performing. And performance, it turns out, has a monthly fee. That fee has a name. The performance tax. It's not a line item on any statement. It doesn't show up in your budget app. It's the cumulative cost of every dollar you spent, not on a thing, but on the signal a thing sends. The lease wasn't really about transportation. It was about what pulling up in that car said before you opened the door. The apartment wasn't about square footage. It was about the address. The watch wasn't about telling time. Every dollar in that category was paying for an audience. And the audience, if you're being honest, was mostly people you didn't know well, whose opinions you would never actually verify, who were too busy managing their own signals to register yours for more than 30 seconds. This year, the average American between 25 and 34 carries over $4,300 in credit card debt and saves less than 5% of their income. That's not a character flaw. That's what happens when the performance tax runs in the background long enough. It crowds out everything else. The 401k contribution stays at the default 3% because there's nothing left after the signals get paid. The emergency fund sits at $400 because the gap between income and image has been quietly growing for years. You know this because you lived it. The checking account that looked thinner than it should for someone making what you were making. The mild, specific dread of opening the banking app on a Friday. The way you'd round up when someone asked what you paid for rent. The performance had a cost. And you were paying it every single month without calling it what it was. What finally stopped it wasn't discipline. It wasn't a book or a podcast or a resolution made on January 1st. It was a number. One specific number on a Tuesday morning, sitting in a car that was losing value while you sat in it. A number that made the audience completely irrelevant. That's where the depreciation equation changed everything. The number was $23,400. You found it on a Tuesday morning, sitting in the leased car, running late for nothing in particular. You'd pulled up one of those trade-in estimator sites, the kind that takes 30 seconds and returns a result you're never quite ready for. You typed in the make, the model, and the mileage. You hit calculate, $23,400. You had paid $34,000 for that car 26 months ago. You still owed $18,600 on the lease buyout. The car was worth $23,400, which meant your actual position, what you owned minus what you owed, was $4,800 on a $34,000 purchase after 2 years of $580 monthly payments. You sat there for a moment. The engine was running. The air conditioning was doing what it always did, and the math just sat on your phone screen, not caring how it landed. You didn't get angry. You got quiet, because the number wasn't the problem. The number was just the number. The problem was the second calculation that followed it, almost automatically, the one you did without meaning to. $580 a month into an S&P 500 index fund. Starting 2 years ago, you grabbed the calculator app, you typed it in. 7% average annual return, compounded monthly, 24 months of $580 contributions, $14,980. That wasn't the number that stayed with you. What stayed was the next one. You extended it. 10 years of that same $580 a month, same return. $96,490, nearly $100,000. From one decision. From letting someone else absorb the first 3 years of a car's depreciation curve, the years when a new vehicle loses roughly 40 to 50% of its value, and buying in at year 4 instead, paying cash or a short loan on something reliable and already broken in, driving it to year 10, no payment after that. That single lifestyle choice, made once, held for a decade, was worth nearly 6 figures in an investment account. Not from a raise, not from a side hustle, from a car. You looked up from your phone. You were still sitting in the leased car, still running late for nothing. And you made a decision that took about 4 seconds and cost you nothing that morning. When the lease ended, you weren't signing another one. The car you bought instead was a 4-year-old Honda Accord with 41,000 miles. Dark gray, cloth seats, no sunroof. You paid $19,200 cash from savings you'd been building for 8 months after the Tuesday in the parking lot. The dealer tried twice to talk you into something newer. You thanked him and didn't move. That car is still in the lot outside the coffee shop this morning. 7 years old now. 98,000 miles. Runs fine. Worth maybe $9,000 if you sold it today, which you won't, because it does exactly what a car is supposed to do. Moves you from one place to another without a monthly payment attached to it. The same logic that changed the car changed the apartment. You didn't upgrade when the lease came up. You moved somewhere $400 a month cheaper and put the difference somewhere it could compound. Currently, the average car payment in the US sits at just over $730 a month for a new vehicle. Most people signing that paperwork this year will do the same calculation you did, about 2 years too late. The depreciation equation isn't really about cars. It's about what you stop sending to an audience and start sending somewhere else instead. Once you understood where the money wasn't going, the next question was harder, because it wasn't just about cutting things. It was about learning to spend on the right things, the ones nobody could see, the ones that don't photograph, the ones that quietly give you back something more valuable than a signal. That's what spending on the invisible actually looks like. Stopping the performance tax didn't make you cheap. It made you precise. There's a difference, and it took you a while to feel it clearly. Cheap is about spending less. Precise is about spending right. The money that stopped going to the lease, the premium apartment, the visible upgrades, it didn't disappear. It just stopped being aimed at an audience and started being aimed at something that actually returned something. The first thing you bought more of was time. Not in an abstract way. in a specific Tuesday morning way. You started paying $140 a month for grocery delivery, not because you couldn't drive to the store, because the drive, the parking, the wandering the aisles, the checkout line, that was 90 minutes twice a week, 3 hours total every single week. You did the math. 3 hours a week is roughly 6.5 full days a year, days that used to belong to a grocery store. You bought them back for $140 a month and spent them on things that compounded. Reading, a side project, an extra hour of sleep that made the next day sharper. Nobody saw that purchase. It didn't photograph. It wasn't the kind of thing you mentioned at dinner, but it quietly returned more than almost anything else you spent money on that year. The same logic went into the direct flight you started booking, instead of the connection that saved $160. The connection cost you 4 hours of a travel day, one of which was usually spent sitting on a gate floor eating something from a paper bag. The direct flight cost $160 more and returned on a clear afternoon. You started thinking about that trade differently, not as a splurge, as a calculation. This is what spending on the invisible actually looks like. Not luxury, not indulgence, a taxonomy, a clean, unsentimental way of sorting every purchase into one of two categories. Does this buy me something that compounds, or does it buy me something that performs? And then there's the other side of it, the part that would surprise people who assume you just spend less now. You will spend 45 minutes reading reviews on a $24 portable charger. Genuinely, without irony. There are 11 chargers on the listing page that all claim to do the same thing, and you want the right one, and overpaying for minor things by $8 or $12 every time is a habit that adds up across a year in a direction you're no longer interested in. You are completely unbothered by how that looks. That same week, without pausing, you approved a $16,800 roof repair, not because you're careless with large numbers, because the roof was a need, and needs don't negotiate. The charger was a want, and wants get interrogated. The taxonomy is that clean. Once you draw that line clearly, needs get funded immediately, wants get questioned. The decisions almost make themselves. The hesitation moves to the right category. The speed moves to the right category. Currently, the average American household spends nearly $1,500 a year on impulse purchases, most of it in the wants column, most of it unconsidered, most of it performing for an audience of one. That number compounds the wrong direction just as reliably as the right spending compounds the right one. You're not depriving yourself. You're just clear on what things actually are, what you don't spend on: signals, status, the visible upgrade that costs $300 a month to maintain an impression on people who aren't paying close attention anyway. What you do spend on: mornings, access, hours, the things that come back to you in forms that don't show up on anyone's feed but yours. The invisible spending built something real. But here's what nobody tells you about the building phase. The part that comes right after you get the system right after the money starts moving in the correct direction. Nothing looks different yet. The account is growing, and it doesn't feel like growing. You're doing everything right, and Tuesday looks exactly like last Tuesday. That stretch, the long, quiet, unrewarded middle, is where most people stop. And it's the only part that actually matters. Nobody makes a video about this part, because it doesn't look like anything. There's no chart inflecting upward on your screen, no moment of clarity in a coffee shop where everything suddenly makes sense. There's just a Tuesday, ordinary, unremarkable, identical to last Tuesday in every visible way. It's 7:14 in the morning. You're at your kitchen table in an apartment that's smaller than what you could probably stretch to afford. You open your brokerage account, the one you set up 11 months ago after the Tuesday in the parking lot, after the depreciation equation rearranged something in your thinking. You transfer $480 into your index fund. The confirmation comes back in about 4 seconds. The account balance moves. You close the app. Nobody congratulates you. Your phone doesn't buzz. Your group chat doesn't know. The friends you grabbed dinner with on Saturday ordered without looking at the menu, and you did the math in your head before you got there, the way you always do now, quietly, without making it a thing. You ordered what you actually wanted. You drove home in the Accord. You went to sleep in the apartment that costs $400 less than the last one. And the account is growing. You know it's growing. The math is not complicated, and you've run it enough times to trust it. But it doesn't feel like growing. It feels like a number on a screen attached to a future you can't touch yet, in a life that still looks, from the outside, exactly like the life of someone who hasn't figured anything out. That's the middle. That specific, textureless, applause-free stretch between the decision and the result. Between the morning you ran the depreciation numbers and the morning in the coffee shop, where none of this requires effort anymore. It is not cinematic. It is not the part anyone talks about. It is, without question, the only part that matters. This is where most people stop. Not because the strategy failed, not because they ran the numbers wrong or picked the wrong fund or made some technical error. They stop because the middle has no audience. And if you spent years, most of your 20s maybe, building for an audience, performing for a room, paying the performance tax on every visible purchase, then the silence of the middle registers as failure. It feels like nothing is happening. So you conclude that nothing is happening, and you go back to something that at least produces a response. This year, roughly 57% of Americans report living paycheck to paycheck. Not all of them are overspending. A significant portion are people who started, who opened the account, made the first transfer, bought the cheaper car, and then stopped somewhere in the middle when the silence got too loud. The strategy was working. They just couldn't feel it working. And the thing you can't feel, you eventually stopped doing. You stayed. Not because you were more disciplined than the people who left. Not because the silence bothered you less. You stayed because somewhere in the 11th or 14th or 19th month, you learned to read a different set of signals. Not the account balance on any given Tuesday, the trajectory, the direction. The fact that every transfer, no matter how unremarkable it felt, was a vote for the version of you that was coming. The $480 this morning. The $480 last Tuesday. The one before that and the one before that. Each one invisible, each one permanent. The account doesn't care how it felt to make the transfer. It just compounds. And somewhere inside that compounding, inside the decision to stay when leaving felt identical to staying, a different relationship with time was forming. Not patience in the way people describe patience as gritted teeth and delayed satisfaction. Something quieter than that. Something that changed what you wanted, not just when you wanted it. That's where the delayed gratification engine actually lives. Not in the discipline. In the question underneath it. It wasn't willpower. You want to be clear about that because willpower is the wrong model and it will fail you if you build on it. Willpower is white-knuckling the checkout page. Willpower is virtue, restraint, saying no, and feeling the weight of saying no. People who run on willpower are exhausted by year 2. They restrict and then they release, hard, on something expensive and visible, and the cycle starts again. What you developed was different, quieter. It wasn't about saying no to things. It was about asking a different question before you got to yes or no. Not, can I afford this? Not, do I deserve this? Just, what is this in 11 years? That question changed everything it touched. The $480 transfer on a Tuesday morning? What is that in 11 years? You ran it. $480 a month, 7% average annual return, compounded monthly, 11 years. The number that came back was $102,400. Not from a raise, not from a bonus, from $480 on a Tuesday that felt like nothing while it was happening. The leased car you didn't sign for a second time, what did that become? $580 a month redirected for a decade, same return. $96,490. You've done this math enough times that it no longer surprises you, but it still does something to you when you run it, because the number isn't abstract anymore. It has a shape. It has a Tuesday morning attached to it. It has a coffee shop and a paid-off car and a meeting at noon that nobody scheduled for you. This is what people mean when they talk about delayed gratification. But they say it wrong. They frame it as suffering, as depriving yourself of something real in exchange for something distant and theoretical. That framing is why most people can't hold the position through the middle. You can't white-knuckle 11 years. What actually works is simpler. You learn to feel both timelines at once. The $480 is leaving your checking account this morning, and the $102,400, that $480, is already becoming starting now without you doing anything else. Most people can only feel the first timeline, the one that's happening right now, in the thinning checking account, in the older car, in the apartment that's smaller than what they could reach for. The second timeline is invisible to them. So the sacrifice feels like sacrifice, permanently, with no relief in sight. You practiced feeling the second timeline until it became as real as the first one. That's not a personality trait, it's a skill. You built it slowly, the same way the account built, one Tuesday at a time, running the numbers often enough that the future stopped feeling theoretical and started feeling like a place you were already traveling toward. The 30-day rule was part of it. Anytime a want surfaced, something you saw, something you felt the pull toward, you waited. Not as punishment, as a perspective. 30 days were enough time for the second timeline to become visible. Half the time, the want dissolved on its own. The other half, you found it cheaper, or found something better, or decided it was genuinely worth it and bought it without guilt because it had cleared the question. What is this in 11 years? Currently, the average American spends over $6,000 a year on non-essential purchases made in under 10 minutes. That's not a moral failure. That's the first timeline operating without the second one to check it. One question, asked consistently, is the entire engine. Not a budget spreadsheet, not a financial advisor, not a January resolution. One question. Run it every time. Let the math answer. And somewhere between the question and the answer, something else was shifting. Something harder to calculate than a compound return. The way other people spent money started to look different to you. Not wrong, not inferior, just aimed somewhere you were no longer aiming. The performance, the signals, the visible upgrades, you watched them happen around you and felt nothing in particular. No superiority, no judgment, just the quiet recognition that you were becoming someone who had nothing left to prove. That shift, from strategy to identity, from doing the right things to simply being someone who doesn't need the room to know, that's where the silence becomes permanent. That's who you became without announcing it. You can't tell me exactly when it happened. There wasn't a morning when you woke up different. No moment where the old version of you formally handed things over to the new one. It was more like a tide going out, slow, incremental, and you only noticed it was gone when you looked back and saw how far the waterline had moved. At some point, the silence stopped being a strategy. It just became how you are. You're at a cookout in your friend Daniel's backyard. This is maybe 3 years into the invisible middle, maybe 4. Daniel just bought a house in a suburb 40 minutes outside the city. 4 bedrooms, a deck, a yard. The kids aren't old enough to use yet. The mortgage is $3,100 a month. He's telling someone about the closing costs, and you're standing there with a paper plate and a drink, and you feel nothing in particular about any of it. Not superior, not envious, not quietly calculating what $3,100 a month compounds to over 11 years. Though you could do that math in about 30 seconds. Just nothing. A pleasant afternoon in someone's backyard. That's when you knew something had genuinely changed. Because 3 years earlier, you would have felt something. The house would have registered as a signal that you were behind on. You would have driven home that evening doing the mental math on what it would take to get there. The down payment, the salary increase, the stretch. The gap between where you were and where Daniel was would have sat in your chest the whole drive back. Now, it just sat there. A house, a nice one. Good for Daniel. You stopped talking about what you make. Not as discipline, as preference. The topic genuinely stopped being interesting to you. When someone at work asked how your investments were doing, you said, fine, doing all right, can't complain. Not as a deflection, as a complete sentence. You weren't hiding anything. There just wasn't anything you needed them to know. The three things that quietly disappeared from your behavior, not by decision, but by drift. You stopped mentioning income, stopped displaying purchases, stopped performing any version of excess for any room. Not because you read somewhere that wealthy people don't do those things, because you stopped having the impulse. The audience had become so irrelevant, so gradually, that you didn't notice them leave. Currently, over 60% of Americans say they feel pressure to appear wealthier than they actually are. That pressure has a cost. Not just financial, the monthly performance tax still running in the background, but psychological. The low-grade maintenance of a version of yourself that exists for other people's consumption. You paid that cost for years. You know exactly what it weighs. You don't weigh it anymore. Your number is $120 million. Nobody in your daily life knows that. Not your neighbors, not most of your friends, not the barista who makes your $3.20 coffee every Tuesday. You're not keeping a secret. You're just not performing. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. The identity didn't arrive with the money. It arrived somewhere in the middle, somewhere between the 14th and the 40th Tuesday transfer, somewhere in the long, quiet stretch when nothing looked different and you kept going anyway. The money followed the identity, not the other way around. And what the identity bought, what all of it was actually building toward, wasn't the number on the screen. It wasn't the net worth milestone or the account balance or the moment someone finally figured out what you were worth. It was a morning, a specific kind of morning, ordinary in every visible way, that belongs entirely to you. The lawn, the coffee, the Tuesday with nothing required of it. That's the last level, and it looks exactly like the first one. You're still in the coffee shop. Regular drip, $3.20. The guy 2 tables over is still on his phone, still showing someone the car. The woman by the window wrapped up her call. The barista is calling out an $11 drink for someone who didn't flinch. Nothing in this room has changed, but you're not reading it the same way you used to. You know what the performance costs. You know what the silence builds. You know the middle is long and quiet, and that's exactly how it's supposed to feel. Tomorrow you'll make a purchase, something small, maybe something larger, and for about 3 seconds before you do, a question is going to surface. What is this in 11 years? You don't have to answer it perfectly. You just have to let it land. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was.